And so now for a more specific application to this rivalry. So Manchester United, they were the first truly English global club brand because they made radical financial moves to ascend to the top of the Premier League, including renovating club facilities, bringing back the club gift shop, and making sure that as much gear as possible could be shipped out to foreign locations. And also the most subtle but most staggering change was removing any semblance of football club language from the logo. And as you can see in the bottom left-hand corner, both of those crests are the current crest for those clubs, by the way. And as you can see on the Manchester United crest, there's no sort of football club or FC. And this was done by a former Manchester United chairman named Martin Edwards, who wanted to make sure that Manchester United just instantly, if someone hears that name, they know exactly what it's referring to, a football club in England. And he thought, you don't need to say what we do for these fans to know who we are. And so that was the intent behind that switch. But that illustrated that tension I pointed out in that quote in the previous slide, in that local supporters in Manchester felt that they were slowly losing their club, losing the focus and their position in the club's focus for success and what it means for the club. Meanwhile, Leeds United, being representing clubs that weren't able to benefit from Premier League globalization, they're still traditional in their makeup because their local, their identity is still synonymous with their localities where they've originated, and they still upheld this two-way relationship because they provide a very significant source for Leeds fans and Leeds and Yorkshire people to exhibit real civic pride and support for the localities that they are in. And another important fact to note is that the crest, as you can see, it still has local symbolism and inclusive language. The White Rose of Yorkshire is still on the crest. If you can recall to the slide where I showed that 1984 badge that had, it was pretty much just the Yorkshire Rose. It then evolved into this crest. This was the crest that followed that one. And while it's in a more secondary position, it's still there. And also LUFC, abbreviating for Leeds United Football Club, emphasizing club togetherness. The team and the fans, supporters, are all together. And finally, it's important for a football club to listen to its fans when they're upset or dissatisfied. And a great contemporary example of that was in 2018, Leeds United, they thought, we're going to really bring about a new era, and to do that, let's change our crest. And so they thought that beautiful crest in the bottom right-hand corner, I'm being very sarcastic, by the way, they thought that would be a good crest to use to replace that left-hand crest, but the Leeds fans, they did not share these lofty sentiments. Long story short, they hated it. They thought that it wasn't an appropriate representation of Leeds and Yorkshire, while some of them thought that, others thought that it just looked goofy and silly, and finally, even others said that it invokes communist or fascist art, and so all of those reasons led to the club scrapping the design for good. And all of this is meant to flow to the final point I would like to make in this section, with that English clubs, unlike American franchises, they can't pick up and leave for greener pastures whenever they want. They're grounded in where they were formed, and so for a global club like Manchester United, it's critical for their expectations and their goals to be able to spread their image and brand, to try and bring in more fan bases and in a way find more homes. And so it doesn't matter where people are in the world, as long as they know who Manchester United is, they're just a part of the club as people in Manchester. Meanwhile, Leeds United, they still need to remain grounded in their city and county, but that leads to a greater connection with its domestic supporters, because that two-way relationship is still going strong between the club and the people, and Also, I would like to note that I'm not trying to advocate that either method is better or worse than the other. I'm not saying that there's a right or wrong way to approach how to engage with fans in English football. It's just, it's unique to know that these clubs, they represent different ways and only operate with the ways they need to. And again, there's no right or wrong. And now that brings us to the last point I would like to touch on, is how the term community has begun to have a different meaning for both of these clubs. So before the Premier League's arrival in 1992, similar to the two-way relationship, many English clubs had a very traditional idea of a concept, and for community, the concept at work here, they thought that it should be defined by geography. Because as this quote shows, for many of these clubs, in their formative years in the late 18th century and early 19th century, when they're being put together, they're being put together with the towns, cities, and neighborhoods around them, because they had the goal of becoming representational entities for these localities and the people in these places, especially in a time when England was rapidly urbanizing and it was becoming more and more difficult for people to find some place to show, like they can identify with something, and also to find people like them. And I bring back that idea of historical tribalism that was born in the 15th century. It hasn't quite gone away because they still crave being part of a group and finding a place where they can exhibit homogeneity with people around them. And so, however, just similar with the two-way relationship that I showed in the last slide, the bigger clubs, they weren't going to stay enamored with all of this romantic and traditional nonsense. They had to realize, okay, this is too simple for us. We're becoming more and more inclusive, and we're bringing in a lot more fans from different places around the world. And so to accomplish this goal, they needed to inspire a change to the community, or to the definition of community somehow. And it wasn't something they did, but because they were so popular, it was easy for the fans themselves to generate the change. And this was done through more action and rituals that they did to move away from just immediately aligning with a club that you're close to based on geography. And so for a global team like Manchester United, perfect for their goals, the definition became a lot less arbitrarily defined and more inclusive and more defined by action. Finally, once again, we look at Leeds United as being different from Manchester United because as Manchester United becomes more and more modern and inclusive and global and continuously growing, Leeds United, they remain a traditional club, and they still have a geographical defined notion of community because, again, their identity is very synonymous with where they're located. And also, I would like to point out that for these clubs that are based in areas in England which aren't as economically or socially crucial to how the country is seen by the rest of the world, they're no longer economic or social poles like Manchester, London, Liverpool, and Birmingham. These football clubs become existentially crucial to the people in these areas because they represent a way for them to show identity and civic pride, especially in a league where not only all of England is watching, but the world is watching. And so in Leeds' case, being able to do that for the people of Leeds and Yorkshire makes it so this geographical idea of community, it's not completely extinct or irrelevant in the Premier League era. It's still alive today, even though there's been a greater separation between big clubs and the more run-of-the-mill small clubs that aren't global like the top clubs are. And finally, I would like to point out that since these two clubs have different physical and existential, they have communities that they operate in different ways, both physically and existentially. This means that these two clubs, they can't immediately substitute for Lancashire and Yorkshire. And what I mean by that is I call back to that simple diagram where it started with the houses and then went to the symbols and then the counties and then the clubs. You can't just place Manchester United in place of Lancashire, and you can't place Leeds United in place of Yorkshire. Rather, what you need to do is understand that there are many social complexities involved with this rivalry, those being associated with what community and identity mean for English clubs and what the Premier League has how it's brought change to these meanings, and finally how a club is expected or not expected to engage with its supporters. And this was a very unique and interesting conclusion that I was able to find, because all of this leads to saying that if you see this rivalry as being influenced from the Wars of the Roses, it is, but it's too simple to say that's the only influence. There are many other social nuances here, and seeing these two clubs having a unique social rivalry in that respect was a very interesting conclusion to find.